300 years of silence had made the galaxy forget about Earth. The small blue planet in the Sol system had once sent radio signals into space, weak transmissions that spoke of a young species discovering technology. Then suddenly, the signals stopped. Complete silence. The Galactic Council's scientists had filed their reports. Another primitive species had probably destroyed itself with nuclear weapons or poisoned their world with industrial waste. It happened often enough. Young civilizations rarely survived their first contact with advanced technology, but today, Survey Ship Wanderer drifted through the outer edges of the Sol system, and everything looked wrong. Navigator Hex checked his instruments 3 times before speaking. The readings made no sense. Where there should have been empty space, around Earth his sensors detected massive structures. Ring-shaped objects the size of small moons orbited the planet. Geometric constructions floated near the outer planets, each one larger than the biggest space stations in Council territory. "This cannot be correct," Hex muttered, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. The last survey 50 years ago showed nothing but a dead world and some orbital debris. Ship Commander Pike studied the display screens with growing unease. The structures around Earth glowed with energy signatures that his ship's computers couldn't identify. Whatever the humans had built, it used technology completely unknown to galactic science. "Run a deep scan of the planet's surface," Pike ordered. The results appeared on the main screen moments later. Earth's surface blazed with cities that stretched across entire continents. Massive towers reached into the atmosphere, connected by streams of light that pulsed with unknown energy. Protective domes covered vast areas, shimmering with force fields that made Council defensive systems look primitive. But strangest of all was the silence. No radio transmissions, no communication signals, no electromagnetic noise of any kind. The planet appeared to be teeming with advanced civilization, yet remained completely quiet to electronic observation. Dr. Nova, the ship's specialist in primitive cultures, studied the scans with increasing amazement. The energy readings suggest technology centuries ahead of our own. But how is this possible? 300 years ago, they were barely capable of chemical rockets. What none of them knew was that humanity had made a careful choice long ago. When Earth's first radio telescopes had detected signals from the galactic community, human leaders had listened carefully to what those transmissions revealed. They heard news of wars between species, reports of primitive worlds being conquered and enslaved, and endless discussions of which younger races would make useful servants. The galaxy operated on a simple principle. Older, more advanced species ruled over younger ones. The strong commanded the weak. Freedom was a luxury reserved for those with enough military power to defend it. Humanity had decided they wanted no part of such a system, so they had gone silent. All radio transmissions stopped. All electromagnetic signals were carefully contained. To the galaxy, Earth appeared to go dark, another failed civilization joining the countless others that littered space. But in that silence, humanity had been busy. Underground laboratories stretched for miles beneath Earth's major cities. Ocean facilities operated in the deepest trenches. Mountain installations burrowed into solid rock. For 3 centuries, the entire human species had worked on a single project, becoming strong enough to face the galaxy as equals rather than subjects. They had cracked the secrets of faster-than-light travel by studying the quantum signatures of alien ships that occasionally passed through their system. They had developed energy manipulation techniques by analyzing the waste heat from distant space battles. Most importantly, they had learned to listen to every communication in the galaxy, understanding the politics and power structures that kept billions of beings in chains. Admiral Ross stood in the command center of Luna Base, humanity's primary military installation hidden beneath the moon's surface. His screens showed the approaching Council survey ship, just one vessel sent to investigate rumors of activity in the Sol system. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "the alien ship is conducting detailed scans of Earth. They've detected our orbital installations." Ross nodded calmly. Humanity had known this day would come eventually. Their expansion had become too large to hide completely. The ring structures around Earth contained enough firepower to level entire star systems. The installations near Jupiter and Saturn housed manufacturing facilities that could build fleets of warships in a matter of days. For 3 centuries, humanity had prepared for this moment. "Any word from the Council homeworlds?" Ross asked. "Our listening posts report increased military activity. 12 Dreadnought-class warships have changed course toward the Sol system. Estimated arrival time, 6 days. Ross smiled grimly. The Council was responding exactly as human analysts had predicted. A show of overwhelming force designed to intimidate the newly discovered species into immediate surrender. It was how they had conquered hundreds of worlds before, but Earth was not like other worlds. "Send the activation signal to all hidden installations," Ross ordered. "It's time to end our silence." Across the solar system, structures that had masqueraded as asteroids and comets suddenly came alive with energy. What the galaxy had assumed to be natural objects revealed themselves as human military bases, research stations, and shipyards. The asteroid belt alone contained enough hidden firepower to match the entire Council fleet. On survey ship Wanderer, alarms began screaming as Hex's instruments detected the massive energy surge throughout the Sol system. Hundreds of previously invisible objects suddenly appeared on his screens, each one radiating power signatures that defied explanation. "Commander Pike," Hex reported with fear creeping into his voice, "we are detecting over 3,000 artificial structures throughout this system. They were hidden from our sensors until now." Pike stared at the tactical display in horror. What they had assumed was a primitive system with one inhabited world was actually a fortress that made the Council's most defended positions look weak. Somehow, in just 3 centuries, humanity had built military installations that dwarfed anything in the galaxy. "Open a communication channel," Pike ordered. "We need to report this to Council Command immediately." But before he could send his message, every screen on his ship flickered and went dark. When they came back online, a human face appeared on the main display. The being looked remarkably similar to several species in the galactic community, but there was something different in its eyes. A confidence that spoke of absolute certainty. "Galactic Council vessel," the human said calmly. "This is Admiral Ross of the Solar Defense Force. You have entered human space without permission. You have 24 hours to withdraw beyond the edge of our system and report to your superiors that Earth is no longer undefended." Pike found his voice after several moments of shock. "This is impossible. Our records show your species went extinct 3 centuries ago." The human's smile was cold. "Your records are incomplete. Humanity chose silence to prepare for this day. We have been listening to your communications, studying your tactics, and building the tools necessary to ensure our freedom. The age of Council dominance is ending." The transmission cut off, leaving Pike and his crew staring at blank screens. Around them, the Sol system hummed with energy from thousands of hidden installations, each one a testament to humanity's 3 centuries of careful preparation. The galaxy had assumed Earth's silence meant death. Instead, it had been the quiet before a storm that would reshape everything. The first sign that the universe had shifted came when Council ships across the galaxy started losing their navigation systems. On the industrial world of Iron Ridge, Patrol Leader Torx watched his squadron's instruments fail one by one. The electronic displays that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly showed nothing but strange patterns that seemed to move on their own. "It's not equipment failure," his chief engineer reported nervously. "Something is actively rewriting our computer systems. The interference is learning how our technology works and changing it." Similar reports flooded in from every corner of Council space. Warships found their weapons offline. Communication arrays went silent. Even the most basic sensors began showing impossible readings. It was as if some vast intelligence had reached across the galaxy and decided to blind the Council's entire military force. On the ocean world of Blue Haven, fishing crews stopped their work to stare at the sky. A ship unlike anything they had ever seen hung motionless above their cities. It was sleek and dark, seeming to bend light around its hull in ways that hurt to look at directly. The vessel made no sound and showed no signs of aggression, but its mere presence sent waves of fear through the population. The humans had arrived, and they were watching everything. In the Council's Emergency Command Center on Central Prime, War Coordinator Brass received reports that defied belief. Human vessels had appeared simultaneously in over 200 star systems, not attacking, not communicating, simply observing with instruments that made Council sensors look like primitive. "Toys! How many ships are we detecting?" Brass demanded, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "Unknown, sir. Our counting systems keep giving different numbers. The human vessels seem to shift between dimensions. We'll detect 50 ships in a system, then suddenly find 300, then back to 20. It's as if they exist in multiple states of reality at once." The truth was both simpler and more terrifying than the Council could imagine. Humanity had spent 3 centuries studying the fundamental nature of space and time. While the galaxy had focused on building bigger weapons and faster ships, humans had learned to manipulate the basic structure of reality itself. Their vessels could phase in and out of normal space at will, existing in quantum superposition until the moment they chose to fully materialize. A single human ship could appear to be a dozen ships to enemy sensors, or 100 ships could merge into one. The laws of physics that limited other species had become tools in human hands. Back in the Sol system, the Council fleet that had come to claim Earth as a new conquest found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Their 12 mighty dreadnoughts, each capable of destroying entire cities, were surrounded by human vessels that seemed to multiply every time they looked. Fleet Commander Stone tried to maintain order among his captains, but fear was spreading through the ranks. "All ships, prepare for battle formation. We are the Galactic Council. We do not retreat from primitive species." The response came immediately, broadcast on frequencies that shouldn't have been possible to access. Admiral Ross's voice filled every Council ship simultaneously, speaking directly through their internal communication systems. "Commander Stone, your vessels are surrounded and outgunned by a factor of approximately 50 to 1. Your weapons are offline. Your shields are being drained by systems you cannot detect. You have one chance to avoid destruction. Order your fleet to stand down and prepare to be boarded." Stone's bridge crew stared at their instruments in horror. Every weapon system showed red warning lights. The massive energy shields that protected their ships were flickering and failing. Somehow, the humans had neutralized their entire fleet without firing a single shot. "This is impossible," Stone muttered. "Our ships are the most advanced in the galaxy." His science officer looked up from her console with eyes wide with fear. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human fleet. Whatever they're preparing to fire at us, it's drawing power directly from the star itself." It was true. Humanity had learned to harness stellar energy on a scale that other civilizations couldn't imagine. Their weapons didn't use conventional energy sources. They tapped directly into the fusion reactions of nearby stars, channeling the power of suns into their defensive systems. But the humans weren't interested in destruction. They had studied galactic history and understood that fear-based rule never lasted. Instead of annihilating the Council fleet, they had prepared something far more sophisticated. The first Council ship to be boarded was Stone's own flagship. Human soldiers appeared directly on the bridge, materializing through what seemed to be solid walls. They wore no environmental suits, despite the ship's atmosphere being toxic to most species. Their bodies had been modified to survive in any environment the galaxy could offer. "Don't resist," the lead human soldier said calmly. "We're not here to harm you. We're here to free you." Stone raised his weapon but found his hand wouldn't obey his commands. None of his crew could move. The humans had deployed some kind of neural field that temporarily paralyzed aggressive impulses while leaving normal thought processes intact. "What have you done to us?" Stone demanded. The human soldier smiled sadly. "We've temporarily disabled the psychological conditioning that the Council has spent millennia implanting in your minds. For the first time in your life, you're going to think freely. It was humanity's greatest discovery during their centuries of observation. The Galactic Council didn't rule through military might alone. They had developed sophisticated mental conditioning techniques that made rebellion literally unthinkable for most species. Soldiers couldn't question orders. Citizens couldn't imagine alternatives to Council rule. Entire civilizations had been turned into willing slaves through careful psychological manipulation. But human neuroscience had found ways to break those mental chains. Stone felt something shift in his mind as the human technology took effect. Thoughts that had been impossible to think suddenly became clear. Why did the Council deserve to rule? Why should some species be considered superior to others? Why had he spent his entire life following orders without question? What have you done?" he whispered, but his tone had changed. The automatic deference to authority was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and wonder. "We've given you back your mind," the human soldier replied. "The choice of what to do with it is yours." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human. Ships made contact with Council forces, but they weren't conquering in the traditional sense. They were liberating. Every being they encountered was freed from the mental conditioning that had kept galactic civilization trapped in endless cycles of oppression and war. On the slave world of dirt plains, workers who had toiled in mines for generations suddenly found human vessels appearing in their skies. The expected bombardment never came. Instead, supplies began materializing around the work camps: food, medicine, and most importantly, communication devices that explained what was happening. "Citizens of Dirt Plains," the message said, "you are no longer property of the Galactic Council. Human forces have disabled the orbital defense platforms that kept you trapped on this world. Transportation to other systems is now available for any who wish to leave. The choice is yours." The response was swift and overwhelming. Within days, the entire population of the slave world had abandoned their posts and evacuated to freedom. Similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds as beings who had never dared to dream of escape suddenly found themselves with options. But the most remarkable change was happening to the Council forces themselves. Ship after ship, when exposed to human neural liberation technology, switched sides completely, not through force or coercion, but through the simple restoration of free will. Commander Stone, standing on the bridge of his flagship as human technicians, worked to repair systems that had been deliberately sabotaged by Council engineers, realized the true scope of what was happening. "They're not conquering the galaxy," he said to his first officer, who was also experiencing the strange freedom of independent thought for the first time. They're freeing it from us. The officer nodded slowly. The question is, what do we do now that we can actually choose? It was a question that billions of beings across the galaxy were asking themselves as humanity's liberation fleet continued its work. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was learning what it meant to be truly free. The revolution spread faster than wildfire across a dry forest. In the industrial sector of Forge World, factory supervisor Mill watched in amazement as his workers suddenly stopped their endless production lines. These beings had labored for centuries without question, building weapons for council armies and luxury goods for the ruling classes. Now they stood still, looking around as if seeing their surroundings for the first time. "We don't have to do this anymore," one worker said, quietly. The word sent a shiver through the entire facility. Across the galaxy, similar realizations were dawning on billions of minds that had been freed from artificial mental constraints. The psychological chains that had bound galactic civilization for 10,000 years were breaking, and the sound was like thunder rolling across the stars. On the elegant council world of Silver Heights, noble Lord Arch received emergency reports from across his territory. Entire planets were declaring independence. His personal fleet had switched sides after contact with human vessels. Most disturbing of all, his own household staff had simply walked away, leaving him alone in a palace designed to house hundreds. "They cannot do this!" Arch raged to his empty halls. "I am their rightful ruler. They owe me their loyalty." But there was no one left to hear him. The concept of rightful rule was dissolving as beings discovered they could choose their own leaders, or better yet, govern themselves without leaders at all. Dr. Elm, humanity's chief researcher into galactic psychology, studied the transformation from her laboratory on Luna Base. The data streaming in from across the galaxy showed the collapse of authority structures that had seemed permanent just months before. "The conditioning was deeper than we expected," she reported to Admiral Ross. "Some species have been psychologically modified for over 1,000 generations. Breaking free is causing significant cultural shock." Ross nodded grimly. Humanity had anticipated this problem. Freeing minds was only the first step. Beings who had never made independent decisions needed help learning how to think for themselves. "Initiate Phase 2, Ross ordered. "Send out the teacher ships." Across the galaxy, a new wave of human vessels began appearing. These ships carried no weapons, no soldiers, no conquest technology. Instead, they brought something far more revolutionary: knowledge. On the farming world of Green Valley, cultivator Brooke had spent his entire life growing food for distant council worlds, never tasting the fruits of his own labor. When the human ships arrived, they brought agricultural techniques that could triple crop yields while improving soil health. More importantly, they brought the radical concept that farmers should eat their own food and trade the surplus as they chose. The human agricultural specialist who worked with Brooke was patient and respectful. "These are suggestions, not orders," she explained. "You can try our methods, modify them, or reject them completely. The choice is always yours." Brooke had never heard such words before. In his experience, higher authorities gave commands that had to be obeyed without question. The idea that he could choose his own farming methods was both terrifying and exciting. "What if I make the wrong choice?" he asked. The human smiled. "Then you learn from the mistake and make a better choice. Next time. That's how growth happens." Similar conversations were taking place on thousands of worlds as humanity shared the knowledge they had accumulated during their 3 centuries of silent development. Medical techniques that could cure diseases the Council had declared incurable. Manufacturing processes that produced better goods with less environmental damage. educational systems that encouraged creative thinking rather than mindless obedience. But the most important gift humanity offered was the knowledge of how to organize society without oppression. On the water world of Deep Current, the aquatic, inhabitants had been ruled by a rigid caste system enforced by council authority. The idea that beings born into lower castes could rise to positions of leadership was revolutionary. When human advisors suggested democratic elections, the response was initially confusion. "How do we know who deserves to rule if they aren't born to it?" asked former high-current Noble Flow. The human advisor, herself a former factory worker who had become one of Earth's top sociologists, explained patiently. "Leadership should be based on ability and the consent of the governed, not on accident. Of birth, those who prove they can serve their communities well earn the right to continue serving." It was a concept that challenged every assumption the galaxy had about natural order and social hierarchy. But as communities began experimenting with self-governance, the results spoke for themselves. Productivity increased, innovation flourished, and for the first time in recorded history, galactic civilization began experiencing genuine progress. The Council's remaining loyalists watched their authority crumble with growing desperation. Emergency Coordinator Black called an urgent meeting of the surviving council members, but only a fraction appeared. The rest had either been captured by human forces or had voluntarily joined the growing revolution. "We must counterattack immediately," Black declared to the handful of officials still under his command. "If we can recapture several key systems, we can restore order and push back this human madness." But his military advisors brought only bad news. "Sir, our remaining fleets report that nearly 70% of their crews have defected after exposure to human neural liberation technology. The ships that remain loyal lack the personnel to operate effectively. Worse still, the Council's industrial base was collapsing. Worlds that had supplied materials and manufactured goods for millennia had stopped production. Their workers were busy learning new skills, exploring creative pursuits, or simply enjoying freedoms they had never imagined possible. The galaxy was learning that beings who worked because they chose to be far more productive than those who labored under compulsion. The human-liberated worlds were already outproducing their former council-controlled output, but now the goods were being used to improve local conditions rather than shipped to distant rulers. On the pleasure world of Sweet Dreams, former council, Elite Comfort realized the true scope of the transformation. The servants and entertainers she had commanded for decades were gone, learning new skills and pursuing their own interests. The luxury goods she had taken for granted were no longer being produced by slave labor. For the first time in her life, Comfort had to consider what skills she actually possessed and what value she could provide to society. It was a frightening but ultimately liberating experience. The human revolution wasn't just political or military, it was fundamentally changing how beings thought about work, community, and purpose. Across the galaxy, creatures were discovering talents they never knew they had, forming relationships based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, and building communities designed for the benefit of all inhabitants rather than just the ruling. Class artist Reed, who had been forced to create propaganda sculptures for council officials, found himself free to explore personal expression for the first time. The results were so moving that beings from dozens of species traveled across star systems just to see his work. Scientist Wave, no longer restricted to researching weapons and control technologies, began investigating questions that had always fascinated her. Her discoveries about the nature of consciousness helped humanity improve their neural liberation techniques, creating a positive feedback loop of freedom and knowledge. Engineer Stone, freed from the requirement to design systems that would fail after predetermined periods to ensure constant replacement orders, created manufacturing processes that were both efficient and sustainable. The galaxy was waking up, and the sound was beautiful. Admiral Ross received reports from across human space showing the same pattern everywhere. Initial chaos as authority. Structures collapsed, followed by rapid self-organization as communities learned to govern themselves. Fear giving way to hope as beings discovered they could shape their own destinies. The Council's power was always an illusion, Ross reflected to his staff. They ruled through psychological manipulation, not actual strength. Once beings realized they had a choice, the entire system became unsustainable. But humanity's work was far from over. The galaxy was free, but freedom meant responsibility. Billions of beings were learning how to make decisions, how to cooperate without coercion, and how to build societies based on voluntary participation rather than forced compliance. It was the greatest educational project in galactic history, and humanity was determined to see it through to success. The massive space elevator on Industrial Prime creaked to a halt for the first time in 800 years. Factory manager Blast stood at the base of the structure, watching as workers who had maintained the facility for generations simply walked away from their posts. They weren't angry or rebellious. They were curious about what else they might do with their lives. "Where are you going?" Blast called after them, genuine confusion in his voice. One of the workers, a being whose species had been bred specifically for mechanical labor, turned back with something new in her expression. Wonder. "Everywhere," she said simply. "I want to see what the rest of the galaxy looks like when it's not filtered through work orders and production quotas." This scene repeated across thousands of worlds as the Council's economic system collapsed, not through force, but through the simple realization that beings had other options. The vast machine of galactic commerce ground to a halt as its essential components decided to explore life beyond endless labor. On the agricultural world of grain fields, farmer folk discovered that the crops she had been required to grow were specifically designed to be nutritionally incomplete. The Council had engineered dependency by ensuring that no single world could feed itself completely. Now, with human agricultural specialists sharing complete genetic databases, planets could become self-sufficient for the first time in millennia. "We could have grown real food all along," folk marveled, as she examined seeds that would produce complete proteins and essential nutrients. "They kept us dependent by giving us plants that would keep us alive but never fully healthy." It was a pattern that extended far beyond agriculture. Human analysis teams discovered that the Council had deliberately designed technological and social dependencies throughout the galaxy. No world was allowed to develop complete industrial capabilities. No species was permitted to research certain scientific fields. Every aspect of galactic civilization had been carefully controlled to prevent true independence. But humanity had spent 3 centuries developing complete knowledge bases in every field. They could share the missing pieces that would allow any world to become truly self-sufficient. Dr. Flame, working from her laboratory on Earth's newest research station, coordinated the knowledge distribution project. Her screen showed requests for information streaming in from across the galaxy at rates that strained even human computational systems. "They're asking for everything," she reported to the Coordination Council. "Complete medical databases, manufacturing, specifications, energy generation techniques, food production systems. Entire civilizations are trying to rebuild themselves from scratch. It was the largest educational project in galactic history. Beings who had been kept deliberately ignorant were learning that their mental capabilities had been vastly underestimated. Given access to complete information, species that the Council had classified as intellectually limited were making breakthrough discoveries within months. The crystalline inhabitants of Crystal Falls, supposedly capable only of basic mineral processing, developed new materials, science techniques that revolutionized manufacturing. The gas-breathing dwellers of wind plains, dismissed as primitive because they had no solid cities, created atmospheric management systems that could terraform worlds in decades rather than centuries. Every species had unique capabilities that had been suppressed under council rule. Freed to explore their potential, the galaxy was experiencing an explosion of innovation and creativity that dwarfed anything in recorded history. But the transformation wasn't without challenges. On the military world of Iron Fist, former soldiers struggled to find purpose in a galaxy that no longer needed armies. The entire planet's economy had been based on training warriors for council conquests. Now, with wars ending across the galaxy, millions of professional fighters faced unemployment. Human social coordinators arrived with retraining programs and new purpose for military skills. Exploration needed brave volunteers. Rescue operations required tactical thinking. Dangerous environmental projects could use beings trained to face hazards without fear. Your skills aren't obsolete, the human coordinator explained to a group of former elite soldiers. But now you can choose what you fight for. Instead of conquering other beings, you can fight against natural disasters, dangerous environments, and the problems that keep communities from thriving. Former General Sharp, whose tactical brilliance had conquered 12 worlds for the Council, found new purpose in organizing massive refugee relocation projects. The same skills that had moved armies across battlefields proved perfect for coordinating the movement of billions of beings seeking new homes in the liberated galaxy. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Without the Council's artificial scarcity and forced dependency, abundance was appearing throughout the galaxy. Worlds that had barely survived on shipped-in resources discovered they could produce surpluses that could help other planets. Trade. Relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation began forming naturally. The water world of Blue Deep, which had been forced to export all its manufactured goods to pay for imported food, discovered it could grow floating gardens that produced more nutrition than the processed meals the Council had required them to buy. Within a year, they had enough surplus food to trade freely with neighboring systems. The mining world of Rock Bottom found that without Council quotas demanding certain dangerous minerals, they could focus on safer, more valuable resources that improved their living conditions while still providing materials other worlds needed. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in how beings related to each other. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization for millennia were dissolving, replaced by voluntary associations based on shared interests and mutual benefit. On the diverse world of Mixplace, 5 different species had been kept, separate by Council regulations designed to prevent unified resistance. Now they were working together on joint projects, discovering that their different capabilities complemented each other perfectly. The underground dwellers provided excellent engineering skills for foundation work. The aerial species offered transportation and communication networks. The aquatic beings contributed water management and food production. The surface dwellers shared manufacturing and agriculture. The energy-based life forms provided power generation and data processing. Together, they accomplished more in 6 months than any of them had achieved in centuries of forced separation. Human observer Bright watched the cooperation with satisfaction from her monitoring station. This was exactly what humanity had hoped to achieve. Not human dominance over the galaxy, but the liberation of every species' potential to contribute to galactic civilization. The psychological barriers were the real chains, she noted in her report. Once beings realized they could cooperate as equals, the practical problems solved themselves remarkably quickly. The former Council worlds were struggling most with the transition. Planets that had been administrative centers, living off tribute from subject worlds, found themselves without purpose or resources. Many of their inhabitants had never learned practical skills beyond bureaucracy and control. But even there, humanity offered assistance rather than punishment. Administrative skills were valuable for coordinating large projects. Knowledge of galactic systems was helpful for communication between worlds. Even experience with control systems could be redirected toward managing voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance. Former Council Administrator Grace found herself helping coordinate the massive refugee assistance program that was relocating beings who wanted to escape their birth world's limitations. Her centuries of experience with interplanetary logistics proved invaluable for organizing transportation, housing, and resource distribution on a galactic scale. I spent my life forcing beings to do things they didn't want to do, she reflected, to her human supervisor. Now I'm helping them do things they choose to do. The work is actually more challenging and more satisfying. The galaxy was learning that voluntary cooperation was not only more ethical than forced compliance, but more effective. Beings who chose their work brought creativity, enthusiasm, and innovation that no amount of coercion could match. Production was increasing across every liberated world. Scientific advancement was accelerating. Arts and culture were flourishing as beings explored forms of expression that had been forbidden under Council rule. But most importantly, the galaxy was happy for the first time in recorded history. Beings who had lived under constant fear and oppression were discovering joy, curiosity, and hope. The revolution was complete, but the real work of building a free galaxy was just beginning. 5 years had passed since the galaxy learned to speak freely, and the transformation was complete beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The rigid borders that had once divided Council space into jealously guarded territories had dissolved into flowing networks of cooperation and trade. Where once there had been conquest, now there was exploration. Where once there had been exploitation, now there was partnership. Navigator Hope guided her ship through the frontier reaches, regions of space that had been declared off-limits under Council rule. These areas were supposedly too dangerous for civilian travel, but Hope had discovered the real reason for the restrictions. The frontier contained evidence of civilizations far older than the Council, ruins that told stories of galactic societies based on cooperation rather than domination. "Look at this," she called to her mixed-species crew, gesturing at the massive structures orbiting a dead star ahead of them. "These installations are at least 50,000 years old, but they're still functioning. Whoever built them created technology designed to last and help others, not to break down and require replacement." The Discovery team included beings from 12 different worlds, each contributing unique perspectives to their research. Former Council archaeologist Dig had spent decades being forbidden from investigating such sites. Now he worked freely with colleagues who shared his passion for understanding galactic history. The inscription suggests this was a network of knowledge-sharing stations, Dig reported excitedly. Ancient civilizations came here to trade information and coordinate mutual assistance projects. It's exactly what we're building now, but they achieved it millennia ago. The revelation that cooperative galactic civilization had existed before wasn't surprising to humanity. Their 3 centuries of careful observation had revealed hints that the Council's oppressive system was an aberration, not the natural order. The galaxy had known freedom before and could achieve it again. Back on Earth, now the Voluntary Coordination Center for Galactic Cooperation, Admiral Ross reviewed reports from across known space. The statistics were remarkable beyond even humanity's optimistic projections. Crime rates had fallen to historical lows. Scientific advancement was proceeding at unprecedented speed. Most importantly, birth rates were climbing as beings who had been afraid to bring children into an oppressive galaxy now felt hope for the future. The Andromeda expedition is ready for launch, reported Coordinator Leaf, who had once been a council propaganda officer before discovering her talent for genuine communication. 300 ships representing 87 different species, equipped with the most advanced peaceful contact protocols we've ever developed. The expedition to the nearby galaxy represented everything the new galactic civilization stood for, not conquest or resource extraction, but the offer of friendship to whatever life they might find among distant stars. Dr. Palm, who had become the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies psychology, had designed first contact procedures based on respect and patience rather than the Council's old methods of intimidation and demands for submission. If we find intelligent life in Andromeda, we'll observe quietly until we understand their culture, she explained to the expedition leaders during their final briefing. Only then will we make contact, and only with clear assurances that we seek friendship rather than dominance. The choice to interact with us will be entirely theirs. It was a radical approach by old galactic standards, but it reflected the new civilization's core values. Cooperation had to be voluntary to be genuine and sustainable. On the former slave world of Hard Rock, Miner Deep was teaching his children about the old days. They listened with amazement to stories of forced labor and council overseers, unable to imagine a world where beings couldn't choose their own work. Why didn't people just leave if they didn't like their jobs? His youngest daughter asked innocently. Deep smiled, remembering his own confusion when human liberators had first explained the concept of choice. We didn't know we could leave, little one. The council had convinced us that this was the only way things could be. Now, Hard Rock was a thriving world where former miners worked alongside geologists from a dozen species to develop sustainable resource extraction techniques. The dangerous tunnels that had killed thousands of workers had been replaced by automated systems that could harvest minerals without risk to life. The children of Hard Rock were learning engineering, art, philosophy, and dozens of other subjects that had been forbidden under council rule. They would grow up in a galaxy where their potential would be limited only by their imagination and effort, not by the accidents of birth and species. Similar transformations had occurred throughout the galaxy. The desert world of sand dunes had become a center for solar energy research, its inhabitants working with species from other worlds to develop power systems that could provide clean energy to any environment. The ice world of Cold Peak had become a hub for medical research, their unique understanding of preservation techniques leading to breakthroughs in life extension and injury recovery. Every world was discovering its unique contributions to galactic civilization. The old council system had treated planets as sources of specific resources or labor. The new cooperative network recognized that every world, every species, every individual had something valuable to offer. The transformation wasn't without challenges. On the former military world of Warbase, some beings struggled with the transition from a life centered on conflict to one focused on cooperation. But even there, human advisors and willing volunteers from other worlds helped former soldiers find new purposes. General Stone, who had once commanded invasion fleets for the Council, now led rescue operations that saved lives across the galaxy. His tactical skills and leadership experience were perfect for coordinating disaster response teams that could reach any world within hours of a crisis. I used to think strength meant the ability to conquer others, Stone reflected during a break between rescue missions. Now I understand that real strength is the ability to help others become stronger themselves. The most remarkable change was in how the galaxy handled disagreements. Under Council rule, conflicts had been resolved through force or the intervention of higher authorities. Now communities were developing sophisticated mediation and negotiation techniques that addressed underlying problems rather than simply imposing solutions. The trade dispute between the agricultural world of green growth and the manufacturing world of metalworks had been resolved not through council decree, but through patient negotiation that found solutions benefiting both planets. Green growth had excess food production capacity, while metalworks had developed new farming equipment that could increase yields. A simple trade arrangement satisfied both worlds' needs while strengthening their relationship. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of the Galactic Cooperation Network, a voluntary association of worlds that shared resources, knowledge, and assistance without any central authority. Unlike the Council's rigid hierarchy, the network operated through consensus and mutual agreement. Representative Bay, who had once been a minor council bureaucrat, now served as a rotating coordinator for the network. Her role wasn't to command or control, but to facilitate communication and help worlds find solutions to shared challenges. No one has to participate in network projects, she explained to a group of newly liberated worlds considering membership. But those who do choose to participate benefit from the shared knowledge, resources, and assistance of thousands of other worlds. Cooperation multiplies everyone's capabilities. The network had already coordinated massive projects that would have been impossible under the old system. The Great Terraforming Initiative was transforming dozens of barren worlds into garden planets using techniques developed cooperatively by hundreds of species. The Medical Knowledge Project was eliminating diseases that had plagued the galaxy for millennia by combining the medical traditions of every known species. Most ambitiously, the Deep Space Exploration Program was sending mixed species crews to investigate the galaxy's most mysterious regions, sharing their discoveries freely with anyone interested in learning. Dr. River, who had become one of the galaxy's leading experts on cooperative organization, studied the network's development with fascination. "What we're seeing is unprecedented in recorded history," she noted in her research. "A galactic civilization based entirely on voluntary participation that's achieving things no authoritarian system ever could." The statistics supported her observations. Technological advancement in the 5 years since liberation had exceeded the progress of the previous century under Council rule. Living standards had improved dramatically across all participating worlds. Most remarkably, interspecies. Conflict had virtually disappeared as beings discovered the benefits of cooperation. The former Council Emergency Coordinator Black, now working as a consultant helping worlds transition to self-governance, often reflected on the irony of the situation. "We spent millennia trying to maintain order through force and fear," he admitted to his human colleague during a break in their work. "But the galaxy is more peaceful and prosperous now that every being is free to make their own choices. We were the ones creating the problems we thought we were solving." As Admiral Ross prepared for his retirement, he looked back on humanity's long journey from silence to galactic leadership with satisfaction. The species that had chosen to hide in the dark for 3 centuries had emerged to light up the entire galaxy with the flame of freedom. "We didn't conquer the galaxy," he reflected in his final report. "We gave it back to itself." The galaxy, that had once been silent under oppression, now rang with the voices of billions of beings freely expressing their thoughts, dreams, and hopes. It was a sound more beautiful than any music, more powerful than any weapon, and more lasting than any empire. Humanity had kept their promise. Earth's silence had ended, and the galaxy would never stop singing the songs of freedom.